The fluorescent lights of the roadside diner flickered faintly, buzzing in the otherwise quiet space. It was nearing the end of the night shift, and the place was almost empty. A young couple shared a booth in the corner, leaning into each other as they whispered, while an older truck driver sat at the counter nursing a cup of black coffee. At one of the far tables, Sarah stood with a weary smile plastered across her face as she cleared plates. She worked methodically, her movements deliberate but heavy with exhaustion. Her hands were rough from endless scrubbing, her shoulders aching from double shifts that had become her norm. Sarah was no stranger to hard work. A single mother to a 5-year-old daughter, she had learned to stretch every dollar and every ounce of energy just to make it to the next day. Rent was due in a week, her car had started making an ominous rattling noise, and her little girl Lily had been asking about a new pair of shoes that Sarah knew she couldn't afford. The weight of it all pressed on her chest, but she forced herself to keep moving, her tired smile never faltering. The small bell above the diner door jingled softly, pulling Sarah's attention from the dishes. A man walked in, his presence unassuming. He was middle-aged, his clothes simple, a faded jacket and scuffed boots that told stories of their own. He carried an air of quiet weariness, the kind Sarah recognized all too well. Without looking up, he slid into a booth by the window, the dim light casting long shadows across his face. "Be right with you," Sarah called, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who had learned to mask her own struggles behind polite cheer. She grabbed her notepad and approached his table. "Good evening. What can I get started for you?" The man looked up, his eyes soft but guarded. "Just coffee and a sandwich, please," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Sarah nodded, jotting it down. "Coming right up?" As she walked back toward the kitchen, she couldn't help but notice how tired he looked, the kind of tired that went beyond physical exhaustion. She pushed the thought aside. She had her own worries to manage. Moments later, she returned with his order, setting the plate and mug gently in front of him. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said. "Thank you," he replied, meeting her gaze briefly before turning his attention to the coffee. The man stayed for less than an hour, eating quietly while Sarah moved between tables, cleaning up and checking on the other customers. He didn't say much, but when he finished, he left a neatly folded bill under the edge of his plate. Sarah glanced over as he stood to leave, offering a polite, "Thank you, have a good night." He nodded and walked out the door, the bell jingling softly again. It wasn't until Sarah went to clear his table that she noticed the receipt beneath the $5 tip. She picked it up absent-mindedly, but when her eyes landed on the words scrawled across the back, her hands began to tremble. Sarah's eyes scanned the words written on the back of the receipt, her breath catching in her throat. The penmanship was uneven, as if written quickly, but the message was unmistakable. "Thank you for your kindness. I know what it's like to struggle, and I've been where you are. Look at the back of this receipt, and I hope it brings you even a little relief." Her heart raced as she flipped the paper over. At first, she thought she was seeing things. Printed on the back was a series of numbers, along with the bold title, "Winning Lottery Ticket." Beneath it was the note, "Redeemed for $50,000. This is now yours." Sarah's knees nearly buckled, and she gripped the edge of the table for support. Her mind reeled. Could this be real? Was it some kind of joke? But the slip felt legitimate, stamped with the Lottery Commission's seal and a claim redeemed confirmation. She blinked down at the receipt, her vision blurred by tears. The man's simple words echoed in her mind. "I hope it brings you relief." Relief! That single word cracked something open inside her. For months, she'd been suffocating under the weight of bills, debt collectors, and the constant fear of losing what little stability she had. And now, a stranger, a man who barely spoke a word, had handed her a lifeline and disappeared into the night. She hurried toward the door, the receipt clutched tightly in her hand. The bell above the diner jingled as she stepped outside, the cool night air hitting her flushed face. She looked left, then right, searching for the man. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars belonging to the remaining patrons. The road beyond was silent, bathed in the dim glow of streetlights. "Excuse me, miss?" a voice called from behind her. She turned to see the diner's cook, Marco, standing at the back door, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah tried to respond, but her voice caught in her throat. All she could do was nod, clutching the receipt to her chest. She wasn't ready to explain, wasn't even sure how to explain. She walked back inside, her legs trembling. At her station, she stared down at the receipt again, her mind racing. Was this real? Could she trust it? The rational part of her told her to check. She grabbed her phone and opened the Lottery Commission's website, her fingers trembling as she typed in the ticket number printed on the receipt. The website loaded, and after a moment, a confirmation popped up. Ticket hash 4827932, $50,000 redeemed. Winner's prize transfer pending. It was real. It was actually real. Sarah's breath came out in a shuddering gasp as she sank into the nearest chair. A wave of emotions washed over her: relief, disbelief, gratitude, and, beneath it all, an overwhelming sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt like she could breathe again. As the evening wound down and the last customers trickled out, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the man. Why had he chosen her? How had he known what she was going through? Had he been watching her? Or was it just a coincidence? She replayed their brief interaction over and over in her mind, trying to find some clue she might have missed. When she told Marco about the note, leaving out the details of the lottery prize, he frowned thoughtfully. "You're talking about the guy in the old jacket, right? He didn't say much, but he left a good tip when he came through last week, too. Same booth, same meal. Maybe he's a regular?" Sarah hadn't noticed him before, but then again, she was always so busy during her shifts. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked, her voice tinged with desperation. She needed to thank him, to understand why he'd chosen her. Marco shrugged. "Maybe. Some people just pass through, though. Travelers, truckers, you know how it is." Her heart sank at the thought that she might never see him again. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than sheer luck. She tucked the receipt carefully into her wallet, resolving to do something meaningful with the money, something that would honor the stranger's kindness. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. As soon as the sun rose, she made arrangements to visit the lottery office. She took Lily to school as usual, but her daughter noticed the change in her demeanor. "You're smiling a lot today, Mommy," Lily said, swinging her lunchbox as they walked. "Did something good happen?" Sarah knelt down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Something amazing happened, sweetheart, and I promise things are going to get so much better from now on." At the lottery office, Sarah confirmed the transfer of the prize money. The staff explained that it would take a few weeks for the funds to process, but the confirmation paperwork in her hands was enough to make her feel like she was walking on air. For the first time in years, she saw a future where she wasn't constantly struggling to keep her head above water. A week later, Sarah was back at the diner. Her shift was nearly over and the dinner crowd had thinned out. She had kept the receipt with her at all times, hoping against hope that the man might return. And then, just as she was refilling a coffee cup, the bell above the door jingled, and she froze. There he was, the man in the worn jacket, looking just as unassuming as before. He stepped inside and made his way to the same booth by the window. Heart pounding, Sarah approached him. "You're back," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The man looked up, his expression calm but knowing. "I am," he said simply. I don't even know how to thank you," Sarah stammered, pulling the receipt from her pocket and holding it up. What you did, it's changed everything." The man gave her a faint smile, his eyes warm. "You don't need to thank me. Someone did the same for me once, a long time ago. I was where you are, working long hours, struggling to make ends meet. A stranger helped me, and I promised myself I'd pay it forward when I could." "But why me?" Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. "There are so many people you could have helped. Why did you choose me?" The man studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the window, where the evening sun cast a golden glow across the parking lot. "When I came in that night, you treated me like I mattered. You didn't know me, didn't judge me, you were just kind. Sometimes that's all it takes to see the good in someone." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she listened. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay what you've done." "You don't have to repay me," the man said, rising from his seat. Just keep paying it forward. That's all I ask. Before Sarah could say more, he gave her a small nod and walked out the door. She stood frozen, watching as he disappeared into the fading light, his silhouette blending into the horizon. As she looked down at the receipt in her hands, Sarah realized something new was written beneath his original note. The greatest wealth is kindness shared. Don't forget that. Sarah stood in the doorway of the diner, her heart full and her mind racing as the man disappeared into the twilight. She held the receipt tightly in her hand, rereading the newly added words. The greatest wealth is kindness shared. Don't forget that. The gravity of the encounter weighed heavily on her. It wasn't just the money or the kindness. It was the reminder that even in her lowest moments, her simple, everyday compassion had mattered. It had been enough to inspire a stranger to change her life. She took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of purpose bloom inside her. The following weeks were transformative for Sarah. When the $50,000 finally hit her account, it felt surreal. She paid off the rent she'd been behind on, fixed her car, and set aside money for her daughter Lily's future. But Sarah knew this windfall wasn't just for her. She thought of the man's words, of the silent promise she had made to pay it forward. Her first step was at the diner. She noticed a coworker, Maria, who often worked late nights to support her family. One quiet afternoon, Sarah slipped Maria an envelope with enough money to cover a few months' rent. Maria was speechless, her eyes filling with tears. "Why would you do this for me?" she whispered. Sarah smiled, echoing the man's words. "Because someone did it for me. And now, it's my turn." But Sarah didn't stop there. She started a small fund for struggling single parents in her community, focusing on those who were working hard but barely scraping by. The fund provided groceries, childcare assistance, and emergency financial aid. Sarah used some of the money to host community dinners at the diner, offering free meals to anyone who needed them. She called them kindness nights, and they quickly became the talk of the town. The impact spread further than she had imagined. Local businesses began to pitch in, donating food and supplies for the events. Customers started leaving bigger tips, inspired by the stories Sarah shared about how small acts of kindness could make a big difference. The diner transformed into a hub of generosity and connection. At home, Sarah's daughter Lily noticed the transformation in her mother. The once weary woman who had come home each night drained and defeated was now full of energy and hope. One evening, as Sarah tucked Lily into bed, the little girl asked, "Mommy, why are you so happy now?" Sarah hesitated, then smiled softly. "Because someone reminded me how important it is to be kind, Lily, and now I get to help others just like they helped me." Lily's eyes lit up. "Can I help too?" Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "Of course, sweetheart, we can do this together." From that day on, Lily became Sarah's little helper at the kindness nights. She carried plates to tables, handed out smiles as bright as her mother's, and learned the value of giving. Despite all the good that had come from the stranger's gift, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her story with him wasn't finished. She replayed their brief conversations in her mind, wishing she had asked him more. Who was he? What was his story? Where had he gone? One evening, months later, Sarah decided to write a letter, addressing it to him directly. She titled it, "To the Man Who Changed My Life." In the letter, she poured out her gratitude, explaining how his gift had transformed her life and the lives of others. She ended it with a simple plea. "If you ever come back to the diner, please let me thank you properly." And then Sarah pinned the letter to the diner's bulletin board, hoping that if he ever returned, he would see it. Weeks passed, and then months. The man didn't return, but Sarah refused to lose hope. Meanwhile, her community efforts continued to grow. She partnered with local charities, expanded her fund, and even started speaking at schools about the power of kindness. The diner became a symbol of what one act of compassion could spark. One rainy afternoon, Sarah was working a shift at the diner when the bell above the door jingled. She glanced up from the coffee pot and froze. There he was, the man in the faded jacket, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He stood hesitantly in the doorway, as if unsure whether to come in. "Wait!" Sarah called, abandoning the coffee pot and rushing toward him. The man looked up, surprised, as she stopped in front of him. Her eyes were wide with a mix of relief and determination. "You're back," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been waiting for you." The man smiled faintly, his eyes warm. "I wasn't sure if I'd come back," he admitted. "I didn't want to intrude." "Are you kidding?" Sarah said, her voice rising with emotion. "You're the reason everything has changed. I've been waiting to thank you, to tell you what your kindness has done." She led him to a booth, insisting he sit down. Over the next hour, she told him everything about paying off her debts, starting the fund, and hosting the community dinners. She told him about Lily and how her daughter had been inspired to join in. She even showed him the bulletin board with her letter still pinned to it. The man listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said. "I just wanted to help one person, but you've turned it into something so much bigger." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears. "Because of you. None of this would have happened without you." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. Flipping through the pages, he handed her a photograph. It was a picture of a young woman holding a baby, her face lit with joy despite the worn clothes she wore. "That was my wife," he said softly, "and that's my daughter. Years ago, when my wife and I were at our lowest, someone helped us, a stranger who gave us enough money to pay for our baby's medical bills. It saved her life. I made a promise that day. When I was in a position to help someone else, I would." Sarah stared at the photograph, her heart aching with the weight of his story. "Where are they now?" she asked gently. "They're gone," he said, his voice barely audible. "But their kindness lives on through me, and now, through you." The man stayed for another hour, sharing stories of his past and listening, as Sarah described her dreams for the future. Before he left, he gave her one final piece of advice. "Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs more people like you." After he left, Sarah stood in the doorway, watching as his figure disappeared into the rain once more. This time, she wasn't sad. She knew she might not see him again, but his legacy would live on through her and the countless lives she touched. Over the years, Sarah's efforts grew into something extraordinary. Her small fund became a non-profit organization dedicated to helping struggling families. The Kindness Nights turned into annual community festivals that brought people together to celebrate generosity and compassion. Sarah's story spread far beyond her town, inspiring others to start similar initiatives. Every time she shared her journey, she ended with the same words. Kindness doesn't just change one life, it creates ripples that can change the world. And in her heart, she carried the words of the man who had started it all. The greatest wealth is kindness shared. Don't forget that.